Hi friends, in this video we are going to focus on test executions. How to debug your test case by running it with multiple breakpoints, how to run individual test cases on multiple browsers, and how to run a test set both locally as well as on Selenium Grid.
We'll focus on 2 to 3 different kinds of executions that we can perform in CITS. So the first and foremost is executing your test case in a debug mode. This kind of execution comes in handy when there is a test case which is failing, when there are some issues with your test case, or when you're developing your test case, you are uncertain about how it is supposed to behave. So you run it in a debug mode to understand how you can make it more formidable. So to run it in a debug mode, the first thing we have to do is set up a breakpoint. So select the step for which you want, where you want your test case to come and stop at. So your breakpoint. So I would say at step number 2. So right click. So we have to ensure that it is selected and it is blue. Right click and then toggle breakpoint. So now at step number 2, there is a breakpoint that has been introduced. So we can not just set up a breakpoint on a reusable, but if we step inside any other reusable, in this case, let me step inside the third reusable, right click, go to reusable. I can also set a breakpoint in any of the steps. I will set a breakpoint at line number 7, toggle breakpoint. So in my test case, I have set up breakpoints in 2 strategic places. So if I go back to my test case, save it, I'm going to choose the browser as Chrome. And instead of this run button, I'm going to click on this debug button. And upon clicking this, we will see that the browser opens up and the login actually is performed already and the execution has stopped. At the top, we see 5 icons. This black one opens up the console for us where we can see whatever action has happened so far. Um, so the browser was opened, the URL was launched, the username was entered, the password was entered, and the login was clicked, and then nothing because there is a breakpoint over there. The next blue icon is the continue execution button. So if I click on this one, the execution will continue and will either go and stop at the next breakpoint that you have, or it will continue till the end if there is no breakpoint in the middle. The next blue icon is the step into icon, or going to the next step icon. So here you can, so if I click on this one, if I use this console, um, place it strategically, scroll down a little bit, and if I click on this one, um, I see that the next few actions were performed. The add to cart object was dynamically set with Sauce Labs bold t-shirt, and the add to cart corresponding to Sauce Labs bold t-shirt was clicked. You see, the add to cart is no longer visible and we have remove instead, right? So this is how you can navigate step by step into, so I'm going to go on. So now the next clicked on the cart icon. So this is how you can execute your test case as well. This is to pause the execution, and this is to terminate the execution. So now I'm going to click on this blue icon, which is going to continue the execution all the way to my next strategic breakpoint, which is here. And it has come and stopped here, and it's going to so if I now click on continue again, it's going to click on continue and will finish the execution. So this was all about how to execute a test case in debug mode. Next, we will learn how to execute a test case from a test set. Before we go into test sets, I want to introduce you to the tagging feature of kits. So in the design pane, you have these test scenarios and these test cases underneath. Now there is a possibility that you would want to tag some of your test cases as, let's say, a smoke test or a regression test or something that you want to execute for UAT or so tagging is basically a concept where you categorize your test cases. This is commonly used in Cucumber as well. So in order to tag a test case, we can click on that test case or select it, click on this tag icon. Now, if I set this tag icon, I already have 3 tags that come built in, but you can create your own tag as well. So I'm going to create a tag called regression. So I want to label this as a regression test case. Now you can add your tag, create your tag with the at symbol or without. I'm going to do it without, and then click on this plus. Okay, so now this test case is marked for regression. Okay, now if I look at the API scenarios, I'm going to use okay, let me close this one. Now I'm going to select the get test case. I'm going to tag it for smoke. Okay, so I have a regression test case and I have a smoke test case. Okay, um, the test case one, the UI test case one is tagged as regression, and the API test case get is tagged as smoke. Okay, so that's about it. That's how we are going to use the tag. Now let's go into the test execution pane and see how we can use these tags. Okay, so in order to create a test data or test set, we first have to create a release. So right click, add release. I'm going to give a logical name to my release. Let's say um, release 1. It's not a logical name, but anyways, let's go forward with it. Right click, add test set. I'm going to say set 1. Okay, now here, in order to create a test set, you can um, select test cases of your choice. So if you click on the scenario, all the test cases underneath get selected. If you individually click on all the scenarios, everything gets selected. All you need to do is just click on this green arrow and everything will be pulled into the main canvas. That's one way of doing. Let me just remove all of this for now. You can also individually check or uncheck the test cases that you want. So if you select only those test cases that you want in your test set, you can individually select them as well. That's another way. And the third way is what we recently learned about tagging. So if you click on this tag filter, um, you have the option of selecting the tags that you want for inclusion into this test set. So I'm going to say I want the regression test case and I want the smoke test case. So if you look at the changes that are occurring at the right hand side. If as soon as I selected regression, it just gave me scenario one. Let me close this. Let me see test case one is filtered out. If I click on the tag filter again, and if I select smoke and close this, the API scenario with uh, get and delete are also added. Okay, delete is also selected. Let's see why, because I remember get is the only one that I had set. So let me see. Oh, I had also accidentally selected smoke as a tag for delete as well. Okay, fine. Um, so now these are the test cases that I want. I'm going to select all of these and pull it into the main canvas. So now my set one is ready. For the API scenarios, I do not need a browser. So I'm going to select no browser from the list. So you have all these browser options that you can use. I'm going to select no browser for the API test cases and Chrome for the UI test case. For this set, you have the option of configuring multiple parameters. So if you click on this run settings, you have the run setting that will open up. Now, there are three test cases. You may want to execute all these three test cases in parallel. In this case, you can change the parallel execution thread count. You can mark it as 3. I'm going to keep them in a sequential execution order for now. Iteration mode can be break on error. In case there is an error, it will stop the execution or continue on error. The environment by default is default, but we want it to pick up the data from the test environment, so just select it from the drop down. The execution mode is local, so currently it will execute on our local laptop, on a local machine. It will take a screenshot for the pass and a screenshot for the fail. I don't want full page screenshots, so I'm going to uncheck this one. And these are some of the options that we have in terms of how do we want this report to be generated. We have by default an extent report that will be created. It also creates the native HTML reports that CITS supports by default. That's also generated, but it doesn't open up if you have selected extent report. If you uncheck extent report, the native report opens up, and the extent report is not generated in that case. Okay. We will talk about the remote grid URL and the Azure NUnit reports in the next video. But as of now, we are going to keep this setup. We're going to save this. So we will now have a local execution and it will generate an extent report. Let me close this. A way to execute this is simply clicking on this run icon, and then the execution happens. Okay, so now we see that the delete test case has failed, and the get and the UI test case has passed. Now the delete test case had failed for sure, because that is how we had designed it. If you remember in the API test case video, we had injected this failure on purpose. We created an assertion of 200 while we were getting 204 as the actual response. So that is fine. Okay, the get test case has passed, and in this extent report, we also get to see the response of the report. So if I just click on response, the response opens up in a new tab, which is also pretty cool. If I go back, I see the UI test case. Now the UI test case also lists down all the actions that it performed and all the assertions that it did. So for every assertion, there is a screenshot. If I click on the screenshot, I get the screenshot of the page where the assertion was done. Okay, one thing to note is this screenshot is not an image that is hosted or locally present on the machine, but is a screenshot which has been base64 encoded into this report. So if you want to send this HTML report to someone via email, he or she doesn't require the screenshot files separately as an attachment. This HTML has the screenshot embedded, so that's pretty nice. Then you do not have dependencies on image files. If I click on this tag icon, I see that two test cases were tagged as smoke. So which was one was get, which passed, and the other one was delete, which failed. And if I click on the regression tag, I see that scenario one, test case one, is passed. Okay, so now this is one way of executing it directly from the IDE, from the UI of the tool. The other way to execute this is via command line. Now this basically marks the onset of our journey into continuous testing, or CI/CD. Understanding the command line features of this tool gives us a lot of power in terms of parameterization from the CI/CD tools. To run this via command line, we need to know what is the command line syntax. Okay, so to understand the command line syntax, all we need to do is right click on the test set and simply select get command line syntax. So we copy this and we go to Notepad++ and we paste this, and this is how the syntax looks like. So let me expand this a little bit. So we have the run.bat, that is the batch file that has been executing. This is the batch file that is used to open up the tool every time. So this is the run.bat that the command line is also calling. Then the action is run. That means it is instructing the batch file to execute. Then the project location, and then we have to pass the project location. See, my first project, that is the name of the project. Then the release name. So if I go back to the tool, the release name is release 1. So release 1, and the test set, so that is set 1. So these are the minimum parameters that need to be fed into the command line syntax for the execution to start. But in addition to this, there are a lot of other parameters that you can feed into your command line to make it parameterized in multiple ways. So let me copy this entire syntax. Let me go to the location of the tool. This is where the run.bat file is located. So I will go to the URL, or rather the directory, enter cmd and hit enter. This will open up the command prompt for me. Here I will just paste the syntax that I have and hit enter. This will trigger the execution, and the execution is done, and the extent report is opened up. The same extent report which we saw last time when we executed it via the UI of the tool. Now we have a similar extent report, but this time we ran it via the command line. Okay, the command line will have the console, the logging of the execution, which is also very handy. And we see that 3 test cases were executed, 2 passed, and 1 failed. The failure is the delete API, which was failed because of an injected error. So this is how we can execute the test cases via command line. One other interesting thing is if we have a test set where the included test cases are differently tagged. For example, TC1 is tagged as regression, and delete and get are tagged as smoke. From the command line, we can also run them based on the tags. So what we can do is we can go to the location where CITS is installed, the same location from where we executed the command line syntax. In the address bar, enter cmd, open up the command prompt. We're going to use the same command line syntax as we used last time. So copy and paste. Um, exactly the same, the run.bat with the run command, uh, followed by the project location, the release name, and the test set. Now, from test set, we only want to execute the test case which has been tagged as regression. To do that, I would use the tags parameter minus tags, and then I'm going to specify the name of the tag. So regression, and hit enter, and then I see the UI test case starting up, and the execution got over. So in less than 5 seconds, the execution was completed. And if we go back to the command line, it shows us that there have been 1 test cases which was selected for execution. So that's pretty cool. So from a test set, you can even identify your intended test cases by specifying the tags and even execute them. So what I will do is I will uh, clean up the command line, and I would paste the same command again, but this time I only want to run the test cases which belong to the tag smoke. So at the rate smoke. And now the API test cases were identified and were executed. The get passed and the delete failed as expected. If we go back to the console, right at the top, it says 2 test cases were selected for execution. So that's also very nice to know that from a test set or from multiple test sets, you have the flexibility of identifying your test cases based on the tags and executing them. See you in the next video where we are going to deal further with the CI/CD capabilities of the tool.